This is my true story. I spent my life raising my daughter, giving her everything I never had. I thought walking her down the aisle would be my proudest moment. But instead, she turned to me at the rehearsal dinner and said, "Don't ruin the wedding, old man." The words cut deeper than a knife. I stayed quiet, but inside I broke. What she didn't know was that I had already seen her secret, texts that could destroy her marriage before it even began. And when the time came, I exposed it. You won't believe what happened next. Before I tell you, tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe so my stories can reach more people. From the moment my daughter was born, I dedicated my life to her. I was not a rich man, but I worked long hours, sometimes double shifts, to make sure she had everything she needed. When she was little, I carried her on my shoulders, took her to school, and promised her that I would always be there for her. When she was sick, I sat by her bed through the night, whispering stories until she fell asleep. When she struggled with schoolwork, I stayed up late helping her with homework, even though I barely understood some of the subjects. I wanted her to feel supported, to know that she never had to face the world alone. As she grew older, my sacrifices grew with her. I paid for private lessons when she wanted to learn music. I paid for sports fees when she wanted to join a team. I never complained about the costs. Every dollar I earned went first to her needs, then to mine. I patched my old coat instead of buying a new one. I wore the same shoes until they nearly fell apart. Because when it came to choosing between myself and her, she always came first. That was my role as her father. When she entered high school, the expenses increased, but so did my pride. She was bright, popular, and ambitious. I wanted her to have the life I never had, so I worked even harder. I picked up side jobs, repaired neighbors' fences, painted houses on weekends, all so she could focus on her studies and her future. When she wanted to apply to universities, I drained savings that had taken me years to build. I told her not to worry about money, that her job was to succeed and make a life she could be proud of. When she got into college, I nearly cried with joy. It felt like my life's work had been worth it. I drove her to campus myself, carrying her boxes up to her dorm room, smiling the entire time, even though my back ached. I hugged her and told her, "I'm proud of you. Make the most of this." She hugged me back, but her eyes were already on her new world, her new friends, her new life. I told myself that was normal. Children grow. Parents fade into the background. I was okay with that, as long as she remembered where she came from. I supported her through those years too. When tuition was due, I paid. When she needed books, I sent money. When her car broke down, I covered the repairs. Even when I had to cut back on my own meals, even when I sat in a cold house because I couldn't afford the heating bill, I never let her see me struggle. I wanted her to feel secure, confident, and free to chase her future without worry. That was my greatest gift to her, freedom from the struggles I had faced. And when she graduated, when she walked across that stage in her gown, I felt like I was the one receiving the honor. All the years of sweat and sacrifice crystallized in that one moment. I thought to myself, she will remember this. She will understand what I've done. I believed that gratitude and respect would follow naturally. When she met the man she wanted to marry, I supported her too. I welcomed him into our home, shook his hand, and told him he was lucky to have her. I treated him like family even before he became it. I contributed to their wedding fund without hesitation. Every bill that came in, I paid my part. The flowers, the venue deposit, the invitations. I wrote checks, smiling, because I believed this was the final step in my role as her father, to give her the wedding of her dreams. I pictured myself walking her down the aisle, tears in my eyes, holding her hand as I placed it into her groom's. I imagined giving a toast, speaking from my heart about the journey of raising her, about the pride I felt seeing her start this new chapter. I thought that moment would be the reward for everything I had given. Not money, not recognition, but the respect of standing beside her on the most important day of her life. I didn't ask for anything in return, not wealth, not repayment. All I asked for was to be treated with dignity, to be honored as her father, to feel like my presence mattered. I believed, after everything, that this wedding day would not only be hers, it would be ours. A day of joy, a day of family, a day where every sacrifice was remembered in a single look of gratitude. But life has a cruel way of exposing the truth. I built my world around her, but I didn't realize she was already pushing me out of hers. I had carried her, fed her, clothed her, supported her in every possible way. And yet, as the wedding approached, small cracks began to show, cracks that widened until they revealed something I had never expected. I thought I was the proud father walking into his greatest moment. What I didn't know was that humiliation was waiting for me instead. The first time I felt the sting of real disrespect from my daughter came at the rehearsal dinner. It was supposed to be a warm evening, a gathering of family and friends before the big day. The tables were set with candles, laughter filled the air, and I told myself this was the moment I had been waiting for. I sat quietly, listening to speeches, smiling politely at jokes, feeling a mixture of pride and nervousness. Then the guests began encouraging me to say something. "Give a toast," one of them said. "Say a few words, Dad." My heart swelled with both fear and joy. I wasn't a man of fancy words, but I wanted to speak from my heart. I stood up, my hands trembling just slightly, and raised my glass. I cleared my throat and looked at my daughter, remembering the little girl I once carried on my shoulders. "I just want to say," I began slowly, "that watching my daughter grow into the woman she is today has been the greatest honor of my life. But before I could finish, she cut me off. Her voice was sharp, colder than I had ever heard it before. "Don't ruin the wedding, old man." The words hit me like a slap to the face. The room fell silent for a second, as if no one had expected her to speak that way. A few guests gave nervous laughs, trying to brush it off as a joke, but the damage was already done. My face burned with humiliation. My hand shook as I lowered my glass back down to the table. I wanted to say something, anything. I wanted to tell her how much that hurt, how much I had given, how much I had dreamed of this moment. But the words stuck in my throat. My pride kept me silent. I sat back down slowly, pretending to smile, pretending I wasn't crushed. Inside, though, something cracked. The rest of the dinner went on as if nothing had happened, but I wasn't really there anymore. The food had no taste. The laughter around me sounded distant. All I could hear was her voice repeating those words. "Don't ruin the wedding, old man." I turned them over in my head, again and again. Was that really what she thought of me? A burden? A risk? A shadow that might embarrass her in front of her friends? The shame was worse than anything I had ever felt. I had worked my whole life for her. Every callus on my hands, every ache in my back, every coin saved and spent. It was all for her. And in front of strangers, in front of her fiancé, in front of family, she reduced me to nothing with one sentence. Guests tried to comfort me later, saying she was just nervous, just stressed about the wedding. But I knew better. Those words weren't an accident. They were honest. They were her truth slipping out when she thought she had control. And the worst part was, she didn't even apologize afterward. Not a word. To her, it was nothing. To me, it was everything. That night, I lay awake in my bed, replaying the moment over and over. I thought about standing up and walking out of the wedding altogether. I thought about telling her that if she didn't want me there, then I wouldn't be. But then, I thought about all the years I had given, all the sacrifices I had made. I thought about the humiliation of leaving, the whispers of guests, the victory it would give her if I simply disappeared. Number I decided I would not walk away. I would stay. I would see it through. But deep inside, I felt something new forming. A seed of anger, small at first, but growing with each memory of her words. For the first time in my life, I no longer saw her only as my little girl. I saw her as someone who had forgotten respect, forgotten gratitude, forgotten who built the ground she walked on. I saw her not as a bride, but as a stranger who humiliated her own father. And I told myself quietly, she will regret those words. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but she will. After that night at the rehearsal dinner, I started looking at my daughter differently. The words she threw at me, "Don't ruin the wedding, old man," were still burning in my ears. I tried to bury the pain, tried to tell myself she was just stressed, that the wedding pressure had made her cruel for a moment. But deep down, I knew better. Something wasn't right. The way she looked at me, the way she spoke to me, it wasn't just stress. It was something else. And then the warning signs began to appear. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I would hear her talking in hushed tones on the phone. I would be in the next room, pretending to be asleep, but the walls carried sound. Her voice would rise and fall, sometimes giggling, sometimes soft and secretive. At first, I thought maybe she was just nervous. Maybe she was talking to her fiancé, calming her nerves before the big day. But then, I noticed the words. They weren't the words of a woman about to marry a man she loved. They were the words of someone hiding something. One night, as I walked past her door to get a glass of water, I heard her whisper, "Don't worry. He doesn't suspect anything. I can handle both." My chest tightened. Who was she talking to? What didn't her fiancé suspect? I froze there in the hallway, gripping my cane, listening. She laughed softly and said, "After the wedding, nothing changes. I'll still be yours." My stomach turned. The next morning, I tried to convince myself I had misheard. I told myself maybe it was just a dream. But as the days passed, I noticed more. At family gatherings, she always had her phone in her hand. She would text constantly, her fingers flying across the screen. When anyone came close, she would tilt the phone away or put it face down on the table. I watched her do this again and again. When her fiancé asked who she was texting, she would smile sweetly and say, "Just a friend." But her eyes told a different story. I tried to push away my suspicion. I didn't want to believe my daughter could be unfaithful, not on the eve of her wedding, not to a man who trusted her completely. I wanted to remember her as the little girl who used to hold my hand, not as the woman whispering lies into her phone at night. But the signs piled up, and my instincts, those instincts that had carried me through life, kept telling me the truth was darker than I wanted to admit. So I began paying closer attention. I watched her when she thought no one was looking. I noticed the way her smile changed when certain messages came through, the way her eyes lit up differently than they did when she looked at her fiancé. I noticed the way she slipped out of rooms to take calls, lowering her voice, always watching the door. Each little detail built the picture clearer in my mind. She was hiding something big. At first, I thought of telling her fiancé. I thought of going to him quietly, pulling him aside, warning him that something was wrong. But then I stopped myself. I didn't have proof yet, only suspicion. And if I accused her without evidence, she would turn it around on me. She would call me bitter, jealous, senile. She would say, "See? This is why I told you not to ruin the wedding, old man." No, I couldn't give her that chance. I had to be certain. So I stayed silent, watching, waiting. I told myself that if there was something to find, I would find it. If she truly was living a lie, then the truth would reveal itself. And when it did, I would be ready. The truth came to me the morning before the wedding. I was up early, as I always am, making coffee in the kitchen while the rest of the house slept. My daughter had left her phone on the counter the night before, plugged in to charge. Normally, I would never touch her things. I always respected her privacy, even when she was a child. But that morning, something inside me pushed my hand forward. Maybe it was a father's instinct. Maybe it was the echoes of those whispers I had overheard, or the image of her hiding her screen at every family meal. Whatever it was, I picked up that phone. The screen lit up with notifications, messages waiting, names I didn't recognize. I tapped one, and what I saw froze me where I stood. Text after text, long threads of words, pictures, promises. Not to her fiancé, to another man. My hands shook as I scrolled. The messages were explicit, filled with words no father ever wants to read from his daughter. She wasn't hiding a friend. She wasn't nervous about her wedding. She was living two lives. One message read, "I'll marry him, but I'll never give you up. You're the one I really want." Another, "After the honeymoon, we'll figure out a way to see each other. He doesn't suspect a thing." And another that made my stomach churn. "I get to keep both of you. Isn't that perfect?" I set the phone down, my breath heavy, my chest tight. For a long moment, I just stood there staring at the wall, letting it sink in. My daughter, the woman I raised, the girl I had sacrificed everything for, was betraying the man who loved her. And she was doing it with a smile, planning to live a double life while pretending to be a loyal bride. At first, my heart sank. It felt like everything I had built, everything I had given, had led to this moment of shame. I thought about the groom, an honest young man who trusted her completely. He was about to stand at the altar, about to make vows that would mean nothing to her. I thought about the guests, the family, everyone who would gather to celebrate a lie. And then I thought about myself, the father who had been told, "Don't ruin the wedding, old man," as if my only role was to stay quiet and invisible while she played her game. But the sorrow didn't last long. Sorrow turned to something else. As I scrolled through those messages, line after line of deception, something inside me hardened. The humiliation I had carried since the rehearsal dinner merged with this new betrayal, and it transformed into resolve. Cold, steady resolve. I realized that morning that I held the truth in my hands. Proof. Not just suspicion, not just whispers, but hard evidence. I copied the texts, printing them out before she ever woke. Each page felt like a weapon, not because I wanted revenge for myself, but because I could not allow her to ruin another man's life. She had disrespected me as her father, yes, but this was bigger than me. This was betrayal against someone who deserved better. I put the phone back exactly where I found it, careful not to disturb anything. When she came into the kitchen later, smiling and humming, I looked at her and said nothing. I stirred my coffee slowly, my face calm, but my mind was already made up. She thought she was clever, thought she had hidden everything, thought I was too old or too blind to notice. But I knew. And the time would come when everyone else would know too. That morning, I stopped being the quiet father in the background. I stopped being the old man she could dismiss with cruel words. I became the man who carried the truth in his pocket, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. After reading those messages, I could no longer look at my daughter the same way. She walked around the house that morning with a smile on her face, laughing as if nothing in the world was wrong. She chatted with her bridesmaids, adjusted her dress, and practiced her vows in the mirror. To everyone else, she looked like a glowing bride preparing for the happiest day of her life. But to me, she looked like a stranger, someone wearing a mask so convincing that even the man she was about to marry couldn't see the truth. I watched her sit beside her fiancé at breakfast, leaning against him, whispering little things to make him laugh. He looked at her with so much love, so much trust. His eyes held the kind of admiration that only comes when a man believes he has found his forever partner. He didn't know he was staring at a lie. He didn't know that while she smiled at him, her phone carried words that would shatter him. Watching that scene unfold made my blood run cold. The hypocrisy was unbearable. She had the audacity to humiliate me at the rehearsal dinner, cutting me down with sharp words in front of everyone, when all along she was the one carrying the shameful secret. She treated me like a burden, but in truth, she was the one dishonoring the family name. Every time I replayed the message in my mind, "I get to keep both of you," the anger inside me grew heavier. She wasn't only betraying her groom, she was betraying every person who had come to celebrate her that weekend. I wanted to believe, even then, that maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But no, the words were too clear. The photos attached to those messages were too obvious. She was committed to this double life. She was planning it, nurturing it, protecting it. And I realized then that if I stayed silent, I would become part of her betrayal. By keeping her secret, I would be complicit in the destruction of a good man's life. The betrayal cut deeper because of who she was to me. This wasn't just anyone. It was my daughter. I had lifted her up when she fell, worked myself half to death to give her everything, believed in her even when I had nothing left for myself. And this was the result. A daughter who lied, cheated, and disrespected not only her groom, but her own father. I felt the weight of that truth like chains around my chest. But sorrow was no longer enough. That morning, as I sat watching her pose for pictures with her bridesmaids, the anger inside me solidified into determination. I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Justice for the groom, justice for myself, justice for the truth. I imagined what would happen if I said nothing. The vows would be exchanged, the rings would be placed, the lies would be sealed with a kiss. The groom would spend years of his life loving a woman who had already betrayed him before the marriage even began. And one day, he would discover the truth. By then, it would be too late. His heart would be broken, his future wasted. And I would have known all along and done nothing. That thought made me sick. I couldn't let it happen. I wouldn't let it happen. She had told me not to ruin the wedding, but the truth was, she had already ruined it herself. I was simply the one who would bring it into the light. As the hours passed and the ceremony drew closer, I felt the weight of the papers in my coat pocket. The printed texts. The evidence of her betrayal. They rustled softly when I moved, reminding me that the power was now mine. She thought I was the weak old man who would sit quietly in the corner, but she had underestimated me. She had underestimated how far a father's love for the truth could go. When I looked at her one last time before we left for the church, she was smiling wide, soaking in the attention, glowing in her dress. Everyone saw a bride, but I saw a liar. And I promised myself silently, before this day ends, the mask will come off. The church was filled with flowers, candles, and soft music. Guests filled every pew, dressed in their finest, smiling as they waited for the bride to appear. The air carried that feeling weddings always have: hope, joy, the promise of something new. But for me, there was no joy. I sat there quietly, my hands gripping the edge of the pew, my coat heavy with the printed texts in its pocket. Every breath I took reminded me of what I carried. I wasn't just a father at his daughter's wedding. I was the man holding the truth, waiting for the right moment to set it free. When the music swelled and the doors opened, she appeared. My daughter, dressed in white, smiling as if she were pure, innocent, untouched by deceit. Guests gasped softly, some wiping tears from their eyes. To them, she looked like a vision of beauty. To me, she looked like a mask hiding rot. I stood because tradition demanded it and offered her my arm. She looped hers through mine, her grip firm, her smile fixed. To the crowd, it looked like a father proudly walking his daughter down the aisle. But inside, I knew the truth. This was a walk of hypocrisy. Step by step, I guided her toward the altar. My jaw was tight, my chest heavy. She leaned toward me once and whispered, "Smile." Her voice was sharp, a command more than a request. I forced my lips to curl upward, but my eyes stayed cold. She had no idea what I carried in my pocket, no idea what was about to happen. She thought she had silenced me with her cruel words at the rehearsal. She thought she was untouchable, but her time was running out. When we reached the groom, I placed her hand into his. He looked at her like she was his whole world. My heart ached for him, because he didn't know he was about to marry a lie. He smiled at me with gratitude, with trust, as if I were giving him the greatest gift. And in a way, I was, but not in the way he expected. I sat down in the front pew, my body rigid, my eyes locked on the altar. The priest began speaking, words about love, loyalty, commitment. The guests nodded, some dabbing their eyes. My daughter stood tall, radiant, her mask still firmly in place. My gaze never left her. She shifted once under my stare, as if she felt the weight of my eyes on her. Good. Let her feel it. Let her wonder. As the ceremony continued, the tension inside me grew. The papers in my pocket seemed heavier with each passing second. I could hear the faint crinkle of them when I moved, like a reminder that my role here was not just ceremonial. My heart pounded, but it wasn't from nerves. It was from the certainty of what I was about to do. I thought of the groom, standing there in blind faith. I thought of the guests, celebrating what they believed was a union of love. And I thought of myself, the man she had dismissed as old man, the father she had disrespected, the one she never thought would fight back. The vows began. The groom spoke first, his voice trembling with emotion. He promised to love her, to protect her, to stand by her for the rest of his life. His words were honest, pure, untainted. Every sentence cut into me, because I knew she didn't deserve it. When he finished, the guests clapped softly, some even crying. My daughter smiled at him, that same false smile she had worn all week. Then it was her turn. She opened her mouth to speak her vows, her eyes wide and innocent. But before she could finish, my decision was made. I could not let her seal the lie with a kiss. I could not let this farce go 1 second longer. The time had come. I gripped the edge of the pew, steadied myself, and prepared to stand. I rose slowly from the front pew, my movements deliberate. The sound of the wooden bench creaking under me drew the attention of everyone in the church. Dozens of heads turned, whispers rippled across the room. The priest paused mid-sentence, his eyes shifting toward me in confusion. My daughter froze, her vows caught on her tongue. She turned her head just enough to glare at me, her lips barely moving as she hissed, "Sit down. Don't ruin this." But I didn't sit. I didn't speak yet. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the folded stack of papers, the printed texts I had discovered the morning before. The sound of the paper unfolding seemed louder than the music, louder than the silence that had fallen over the church. I held the pages firmly, my hands no longer trembling. For the first time in years, my voice was steady and clear. "I have something that needs to be read," I said, projecting my words so everyone could hear. "Something the groom deserves to know before he makes his vows." The whispers grew louder, guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The groom turned toward me, his brow furrowed in confusion. My daughter's face turned pale. She stepped forward quickly, her hand outstretched. "Dad, stop. Please, not now." Her voice was frantic, desperate, but it was too late. I looked at the groom, straight into his eyes. "You love her. You trust her. But you don't know the truth, and I cannot, in good conscience, sit here and let this lie continue." Then I began to read. Word by word, I spoke the messages aloud. "I'll marry him, but I'll never give you up. You're the one I really want." Gasps echoed through the pews. I turned the page and kept going. After the honeymoon, we'll figure out a way to see each other. He doesn't suspect a thing. Murmurs erupted from the crowd. My daughter's lips trembled as she whispered, "Stop, please stop." But my voice cut through hers. I read the final line, the one that sealed her betrayal. "I get to keep both of you. Isn't that perfect?" The church erupted. Guests gasped. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The groom's face went pale, his jaw clenched tight as the words sank in. He looked at her, his eyes wide, searching for denial, for explanation, for anything. But she had nothing. Her lips moved, but no words came out. She was caught, exposed, stripped of her mask. I lowered the papers, my duty done. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I didn't need to. The truth was louder than any anger I could have shown. The silence between my words was enough to crush her. She turned toward me, her eyes wet with tears, and whispered, "Why would you do this?" My answer was calm, steady, final. "Because you told me not to ruin the wedding, old man. But you ruined it yourself. I only made sure the truth was heard." The moment the words left my mouth, the church erupted into chaos. Gasps filled the air, sharp and loud like breaking glass. Guests turned their heads, eyes darting from me to my daughter, to the groom, and back again. The silence of the ceremony was gone, replaced by the noise of whispers, shocked exclamations, and the rustling of people shifting in their seats. It was like dropping a stone into still water. Every ripple spread wider and wider, touching every soul in that room. The groom stood frozen at the altar. His face went pale, his eyes wide, his lips parted but unable to form words. He clutched the small book of vows in his hands, but it slipped and fell to the ground without him noticing. He looked at my daughter with disbelief written all over him, as if waiting for her to laugh, to shake her head, to deny it all. But she didn't. She couldn't. The color drained from her face, her shoulders slumped, and in that silence, her guilt was louder than my voice. The guests closest to us leaned forward, some with their hands over their mouths, others whispering harshly to each other. "Is this true? Did he really just say that? How could she do this?" The shockwave was undeniable. Every set of eyes that had been filled with admiration moments earlier now burned with judgment. My daughter, desperate, tried to reach for the groom's hand. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered, her voice trembling. But the groom pulled back sharply, his body stiff with anger and betrayal. "Not what it looks like?" he spat, his voice breaking. "Your father just read your words. How could you?" His voice echoed through the church, harsher than mine ever could have been. She turned to me then, her face red with panic, her voice rising into a scream. "Stop this! You're ruining everything!" But no one believed her anymore. The mask was gone. The lies were exposed, and no amount of shouting could erase the words everyone had just heard. The bridesmaids exchanged nervous glances, some stepping back as if they wanted no part in the scandal. The groom's family looked horrified, whispering among themselves, their faces twisted in disappointment and anger. One older guest stood up and shook his head, muttering, "Shameful. Absolutely shameful." As I stood there, the papers still in my hand, I felt no need to add more. The truth had already done its work. I didn't need to shout or curse. The evidence was there, undeniable, plain as day. The room that once celebrated her now condemned her. And that was enough. My daughter's voice broke as she tried again to plead. "Please, please listen to me. It's not what you think." But no one listened. The groom turned away from her, his shoulders stiff, his hands clenched into fists. He stepped down from the altar, his shoes echoing loudly on the church floor. Each step he took toward the exit was like a hammer pounding the coffin of her wedding. "Wait!" she cried, chasing after him, her dress dragging across the floor. But he didn't turn back. He walked straight out the doors, the heavy wood slamming shut behind him. The sound rang in the air, final, brutal, undeniable. The guests began to disperse, some shaking their heads, others muttering to each other about betrayal, about lies, about shame. The beautiful wedding she had dreamed of was in ruins, destroyed in front of everyone. And I didn't lift a hand to stop it. I didn't need to. She had destroyed it herself with her choices. I had only let the truth speak. As I sat back down in the pew, calm and silent, I looked at my daughter. She stood there in her white dress, surrounded by whispers, her face streaked with tears, her groom gone, her day shattered. And for the first time in years, I no longer felt humiliated. I felt strong. The power she had taken from me with her cruel words was back in my hands. When the groom stormed out of the church, the silence he left behind was louder than the music that had played when the ceremony began. My daughter stood there at the altar in her white dress, frozen, her hands trembling, her face wet with tears. Guests whispered harshly, some gathering their coats, others shaking their heads in disgust. The dream she had built, the wedding she had demanded everyone celebrate, had collapsed before it ever began. And she knew it. I stayed seated in the front pew, calm, watching the chaos unfold. She had begged me not to ruin her wedding, but the truth was, she had ruined it long before I opened my mouth. My part was simple. I had only revealed the truth she tried to bury. Now, there was no burying it. The groom's family stood up and left in silence, their faces filled with anger and shame. The sound of the heavy church doors closing again and again was like nails sealing the coffin of her big day. Some of the guests tried to comfort her. A bridesmaid put an arm around her shoulder, whispering frantically, but my daughter shrugged her off, collapsing onto the steps at the altar. "He'll come back," she sobbed. "He'll come back." But I knew better. I had seen the look in the groom's eyes. That wasn't the look of a man who would forgive. That was the look of a man who realized he had been betrayed, and no ceremony, no vows, no flowers could change that. Eventually, the priest closed his book and left quietly, unwilling to stay in the middle of such scandal. The music stopped. The flowers meant nothing. The wedding was over. Guests filed out, some shaking their heads, others whispering harsh judgments. "She doesn't deserve him." How could she do that? Her own father read it. Every word cut into her pride. Every glance reminded her of the mask she had lost. When the church finally emptied, it was just the two of us left. She stormed down the aisle toward me, her heels clicking against the floor, her voice breaking with fury. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed, her face red, her tears streaking down her cheeks. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You destroyed my wedding." I stood slowly, looking her in the eyes. My voice was steady, low, but sharp enough to cut. "Number you destroyed it yourself. I only showed them the truth." She sobbed harder, her hands clenching at her dress. "You should have stayed quiet. You should have supported me. You're my father. You're supposed to protect me." I shook my head. A father protects his child when they are innocent. But when that child lies, cheats, and betrays, a father protects the people they are hurting. I did what I had to do. Her cries turned into rage. She pointed at me, her voice echoing through the empty church. "You're dead to me. Do you hear me? Dead." The words didn't sting the way she thought they would. I had already mourned the daughter I once knew. The girl who held my hand as a child was gone long before this day. What stood before me now was only a stranger in a white dress. I walked past her, slow and calm, leaving her standing alone at the altar. Her screams followed me, but they had no power anymore. I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I held the strength. I had endured her disrespect, her cruelty, her betrayal, but I would never endure her lies. Not anymore. Outside the church, the sun was shining. Guests lingered in small groups, whispering, pointing, gossiping. Some looked at me with pity, others with respect. I didn't care either way. I had done what needed to be done. I walked past them all, my head held high. That night, I ignored her calls. The phone rang again and again, her number flashing across the screen, her voicemails filling up with screams, insults, and desperate pleas. I didn't listen. I didn't respond. My silence was my answer. For the first time in years, the balance had shifted. I was no longer the old man silenced at the table, no longer the father mocked with cruel words. I was the one who stood, the one who spoke, the one who chose truth over comfort. And though she hated me for it, though she cursed my name, I knew I had done the only thing a man of dignity could do. I walked away from that church with my head high. For once, I was not the humiliated old man she thought she could control. I was the man who stood when no one else would, the man who spoke when silence would have been easier. She told me not to ruin the wedding, but the truth was, the wedding was already ruined by her lies. All I did was shine a light on them. In the days after, the scandal spread fast. People talked, families whispered. Neighbors who had once admired her now shook their heads when her name came up. The groom cut all ties immediately. He didn't just walk out of the church, he walked out of her life, and he never came back. She had lost him forever. She blamed me, of course. Angry messages, bitter words, curses that tried to paint me as the villain. But I didn't answer. I didn't fight back. I didn't need to. My silence told her everything. I had nothing left to explain. She knew the truth, and so did everyone else. I used to believe that respect came automatically with sacrifice, that if I gave everything to my child, she would honor me in return. But I learned the hard way that respect must be earned, even within a family. She had mocked me, dismissed me, humiliated me in front of others. And worse, she had betrayed a man who trusted her with his heart. That was the final line. I could not let it stand. Now I live in peace with myself. I am not weighed down by secrets or lies. I did what needed to be done, even if it broke her world. She wanted me silent, invisible, powerless. Instead, I became the one voice she could not silence. I sent her one message after it was all over, just one note, folded neatly, and left at her door. It said, "You told me not to ruin the wedding. I didn't. You did." And that was the end. My final thought is, respect isn't owed to age, but betrayal always earns exposure.